have the distinct pleasure now of introducing our moderator for our first panel, Pathways That Lead to Violence. Pathways That Lead to Violence. We have a gentleman with us by the name of Mr. Robert Bobb. He is president and CEO of his company, and he has leveraged more than 30 years of executive management experience to help governments, schools, and businesses find financial and operational solutions, greater efficiency, long-term viability. He provides expertise on these issues facing urban governments, including implementing educational reform, economic development, community and neighborhood development, managing municipal budgets and finances, and effective contract negotiations. Now, this is 30 years of his experience. He's now taking on a new role that is challenging, but all of his roles, as I have known him, have been challenging. And he was most recently was appointed as the Emergency Financial Manager for Detroit Public Schools. We know the challenges that Detroit has faced. Many urban districts, many school districts are facing challenges. But he is the man because I've seen him work. In fact, I met him when he, I believe, was still city manager in Oakland. And I was a newly elected official on the city council in Norfolk. And I attended the National Forum of Black Public Administrators. And there I learned from him. I watched him lead other young individuals who were moving into city government. And so I am proud of his growth. I am proud that he shares his knowledge as a leader with others. And there are so many out working in city government today under his tutelage that helps them now to be better leaders and to be able to take risk and make some wise decisions. And so I now introduce to you our moderator for this panel, Mr. Robert Bobb. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. There is the old adage that says, few people in the audience, but more people in the Army. And so we're going to take spread for what happens, our message today, and we're going to create a greater Army as we leave here today. I am very pleased to participate in today's summit, and I have a distinguished panel of lawyers, day ministers, individuals who worked in the community, who understands youth violence in our community. And so I think, and the best way panels work is that, we're going to be brief, but the interaction that we have from the audience is going to be key to the success of this panel. I've worked in municipalities all across the country, and I have seen violence in many of those, in every one of those communities, including the District of Columbia. And, I came up during a period in many of the cities that I managed when we had the crack epidemic, as many of you are aware, and young black men, boys, were falling dead in the street daily. I remember when I was city manager in Richmond, Virginia, and I would receive the phone calls at 2 or 3 in the morning of yet another young black person murdered in our community. And, oh, by the way, it was mostly black on black homicide in those communities. And then the most vivid memory that I have from going to the scene of many of these homicides in our communities where you have large numbers of homicide and violence, when the cameras showed up and the news media showed up, you see little children, instead of being afraid of seeing a dead body on the street, hamming it up for the cameras. And that's the tragedy when we have so much violence in some of our communities. I'd just like to open up with just a couple of questions that I will pose to my panel members after they've given their comments. You know, our session is on a pathway to violence. Most recently, I read a piece from the city of Pittsburgh where they kind of reversed this whole trend and pathway to violence and created a program called A Pathway to Peace. And in reading their document and their program, it was kind of a reversal from what has been occurring in our community and in their community, in fact, and they created this program. And I don't know how robust it is today, but it was a pathway to peace. And so there are a couple of questions that I believe we need to examine today. The extent to which our education system succeed in creating great and powerful minds, or the extent to which it does not succeed in giving our children the tools that they need to succeed and to address the issues of how do we deal with anger management, how do they deal with bullying, how do they address all of those types of issues that in fact impact the way children behave when they go back into their community. So the extent to which the education system succeeds or fails in creating this pathway as to why children are gets involved in violent situations. And then the other point that we want to raise is the extent to which the media, the role that the media plays with respect to the types of programming that we see today, whether or not how those programs reinforce and legitimize violence in their activities, and how children in watching and becoming engaged and involved in all of those programs, how those programs desensitize our children with regard to violence and to violent activities. And so I'd like to introduce our panelists. We have a role for them here. Wendy Pohlhaus, who is an executive assistant with the United States Attorney General's Office, but more specifically, she has a broad, in addition to having a great legal mind, she also has a great outreach into the community and knows the community extremely well. We also have Attorney Peggy Miller, who is also a day minister, who has practiced law here in the District of Columbia. But again, both of our panelists can offer great opportunities with regard to this whole notion of pathways to violence. And let me just say that there's a great quote in our program today, where we have quotes from Mahatma Gandhi. I would encourage those of us who have not read the program to review those quotes with regard to violence and nonviolence in particular, as well as quotes from Dr. Martin Luther King. I think those are lessons that we should take as a takeaway from today. So, Ms. Pohlhaus, how do you want to, okay.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
I'm so pleased to be here and to share this day and to talk about something that's so dear to my heart and also to my career, just protecting people from violence. And in thinking about pathway to violence, first some of the things that we all know too well, such as poverty, lack of educational and employment opportunities, breakdown of families, and a breakdown of community structures. However, this morning, what I'd like to talk about, the pathways of violence, are the trauma, how children are traumatized and what that trauma causes through their exposure to violence. I also like to talk a little bit about the lack of trust between police officers, prosecutors, which what I do, and the community, and what we can do to kind of alleviate that. And I also want to talk about, in spite of our children lying dead in the street, this anti-snitching sentiment has caused our communities not to come forward and tell law enforcement what they know. Now, according to a 2012 report, the Attorney General's report on children exposed to violence, out of 76 million children who are currently residing in the United States, 46 million can expect to have their lives touched by violence. When I say violence, I mean crime, abuse, psychological trauma. They experience this violence in their homes, in their neighborhoods, in their schools, locker rooms, places of worship, shelters, streets, and the list will just go on and on. They're exposed to physical, sexual, verbal, emotional, and they're even exposed to human trafficking. And I'm talking about slavery, y'all. Human trafficking, slavery. They're witnessing their friends and family being victimized and killed. And that same report indicates that 1 out of every 10 children are exposed to more than one of these sources. That means our children are experiencing multiple acts of violence from different sources. We have kids walking around in our neighborhoods who are suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder. And then you couple this trauma with the fact that our children are losing parents to incarceration. According to another department report, in 2007, our prison population was approximately 1,518,534 people. 809,800 were parents of minor children. That's a lot of parents missing. Approximately 7,200 were fathers, and 65,000 were mothers. And see, those same children are dealing with a sense of loss from their parent. Could you imagine your parent is gone? You're grieving because your parent is not there. And then you're also, on top of that grief, you don't have any parental guidance. There's no one really there who is guiding you through all this trauma and stress and who you can go to. You know, it's not surprising that these factors, traumatization, victimization, sense of loss, absence of parental guidance, may cause a child to act out violently, commit delinquent acts, and eventually violent criminal crimes. Part of the response to these issues requires a government response. And for instance, the Department of Justice does have an initiative called Defending Childhood, which seeks to document the issue of children exposed to violence with hard research and creating grant funding for opportunities for nonprofits who work with children exposed to violence. And as to incarceration, the Attorney General has a Smart on Crime initiative which requires federal prosecutors to pursue alternatives to incarceration for low-level, nonviolent crimes that are not connected to any gangs. And examples of these alternatives would be, for instance, diversion or the use of specialty courts. And we also we have placed a new focus on protecting Americans from violent crimes, financial fraud, and protecting our most vulnerable victims, and that would be children. And all government agencies are focusing on reentry. That is, making sure people who come home from prison have a smoother acceptance into our communities, have ways to feed themselves, places to live. We all recognize the collateral cost of incarceration, and we're working diligently on that. Now, part of the response to helping our children, and I'm focusing on children because I just interact with so many kids in DC, and it all starts with the children. I mean, our hope for tomorrow are the children. If we really are going to change the culture, it's about the children. That's why I'm so focused this morning on the kids as, talking about the pathway to violence. Now, part of the response is a community response and it's an individual response. Now, I go to a lot of community meetings where people are plagued with crime and they're frequently frustrated. They're angry, and they're angry because they have crime in their neighborhood. And frequently, the truth of the matter is that a lot of their crime is being committed by young people, by juveniles. And so people, their anger is directed towards our children, our babies, like lock them up, these kids are, bad. And what I'm asking communities to do who are listening to me this morning is just kind of hit the pause button for a minute. And when you see a kid who, is bad, a kid who you want to say, oh, he's a juvenile delinquent, it's a lost cause, pause for a minute and ask yourself this: what has happened to that child? What has happened to that child? Are there safe places in my community where this child can express his or her experience or get the treatment that they need? Because post-traumatic stress disorder requires treatment. And so you have to ask your communities and really look at that as a problem. Are there outlets? Are there ways in which we are helping these children? And as an individual, we have to ask ourselves, am I a trusted adult? Now, I have not always been a trusted adult. Now, I've had youth programs, and I remember one time this teenager came in, and he said, Miss Wendy, you're stressed, right? I'm stressed, Miss Wendy, and he was 16 years old. And I said to myself, because I'm from the old school, I said, boy, you got nothing to be stressed about, you 16 years old, and that's what I said, right? But I was wrong, because as that child began to explain the violence that he experienced over the 6 months that he, in his life, as he explained the responsibilities that he had grown man responsibilities, and yet he was just a child. I was like, baby, you have every right to be stressed, and Miss Wendy is sorry. And so you have to say to yourself, am I a trusted adult? Trusted adults are people who have their eyes open and their ears open, and they stand ready to respond and support our children. Trusted adults serve as examples. They encourage and uplift children. So you got to be looking out for kids. When a child is walking and coming to your radar screen, often kids come into my radar screen, and you have to notice what's happening with the kid. Like churches, your Boy Scout troop. When you come in contact with children, you just got to slow it down a little bit and just pay attention and just kind of check in and see what's going on, because you'll be surprised what our kids are carrying with them every day. Now, part of supporting our children is when they're hurt, trafficked, murdered, we as a community have to ensure that they get justice in the criminal justice system. According to the report on children exposed to violence, we lose on average more than 9 children ages 5 to 18 to homicide or suicide per day. That is 3,000 children a year. Part of ensuring that they get justice can be peaceful protest. However, what is also needed in the community is full participation in the criminal justice system as witnesses. In some communities, some people can have their purses snatched. Somebody can just snatch your purse. And there are tons of witnesses. In some communities, a child can be lying in the street, dead from a gunshot wound, and folks will turn a blind eye. That's unacceptable. Here in Washington, D.C., in 2003, we still have 3 open homicide investigations where police are seeking the information from the public where the victim was under 18. These children's names are James Edward Dean, Darius Cannon, and Malik Spears. What do we, the trusted adults, the community, the village, what do we owe James, Darius, and Malik? We owe them the truth. We need to be a community where when we see our children being hurt, being shot, we must come forward and tell law enforcement and get the truth and get them justice. Now, I am totally realistic. I know people are scared to come forward, but you also should know that prosecutors take great aims to protect our witnesses. And it is a very rare occurrence when a witness gets hurt. And when it happens because the victim has left our program and left our security and have gone back into the area of danger. And that's when it happens, but it doesn't happen any other time. And I also know that people simply don't trust police and prosecutors, and I recognize that. And that's one of the ways in DC, it's a great model that we have both community policing and community prosecution. And community policing and community prosecution, what that is about is that you don't have the police up here and the community here. You have the police, you have the community, you have the prosecutors, and we're here, we're together. And we don't just kind of talk to each other in times of crisis, we talk to each other in times of calm. And it's the kind of program where, for instance, as a community prosecutor, I've sat with community police officers in people's homes to talk about what's happening. We do things together. We have basketball games together. We have youth summits together. We do things together in times of calm, so the first time that we're talking is not when something dangerous jumps off in the community. We already know each other. And people feel free to call the police. Like, I've been at meetings where they know the beat officer, they know how to contact the actual lieutenant that's the head of that section. People know how to call me. I have prosecutors in every police station, and people know how to pick up their number. And that's the kind of relationship that we need to begin to look at. And for those communities that are listening out there this morning, there are people that can help if you're looking to establish that. One, the Department of Justice has an office called Community-Oriented Police Services, and it's called COPS. It's www.cops.gov. And they can give you some technical assistance. There's also another entity called the Community Relations Service, and that's www.crs.gov, and they help the communication between communities and law enforcement, help establish that. And so that's one of the ways we can begin to instill trust, and people should begin to look at that. And also we have to simply hold, when police are not doing their jobs, we must hold them accountable through our officials. That's why the vote is so precious. So if your police are not doing what they need to do in your community, then you need to speak out, not when something jumps off, but anytime something jumps off. And another thing that improves trust is that when things go wrong, when a police officer does something wrong, and they're capable of doing things, they're not perfect. There has to be a way, each community has a way of redress. For instance, in Washington, D.C., there's an independent agency called the Office of Police Complaints. And so when something happens, when you're stopped wrong, or when something happens, the police is too forceful, there is an independent agency that will take that report and investigate it. And police officers simply, one police officer can't simply take a bunch of reports. That's going to be a sign to his hierarchy that something's wrong. So people have to be more proactive in handling this in a peaceful way, going to make the report, calling the lieutenants, calling the hierarchy in police to say, look, y'all need to do something about this officer today, and continuously and keep it up. And that's also one of the ways in which we increase trust. We call out the officers that are the bad eggs, and we expect redress even for the littlest things. So be thinking about whether in your communities, whether there's a way in which you can seek redress when there's the smaller things. So the other thing that we need to talk about is that we need to change the dialogue. We've been talking about changing the dialogue and of coming forward. And there's a tremendous cost when we don't come forward. First, a small handful of fallen offenders will continue to terrorize our communities and can continue traumatizing our children. Second is that we are teaching our children that when they are victims, we as a community will not go forward and get them justice. And thus, we leave them with no other alternative than to get justice through violent retaliation. I mean, what do you want our kids to do? I mean, if we will not stand up and go to court, and we will not stand up and tell what we saw, a kid who's seeing his friend murdered, that kid's going to want to do something. And if we have taught them that, oh, no, you can't talk to the police, oh, no, we can't go to court, then the only alternative that we have left them is violent retaliation. then the most important thing to me when I look at this is when a child can see that in some neighborhoods people can get justice for a purse snatch, but when they are hurt, maimed, paralyzed, and killed, there is no justice for them because no one will come forward. We as a community, we communicate to our children that their lives have no value. Right? When we don't speak up to them, what is that saying about their lives? How we feel about their lives, whether we really care. See, that's what being a trusted adult is. It means that we have to show we care about our kids. Every time they get hurt, we need to step up and talk about it and make sure that the people who know something say something. And also, when an individual in our communities do come forward, because it happens sometimes, people do come forward every day. And we need to also change the dialogue about when that person comes forward, how we treat that person. Do we walk around talking about, oh, that person's hot, you know, they're snitching? Or do we applaud that person as a true hero? A person who comes forward is a hero because they recognize the things that can happen to them by coming forward, and they come forward, and that's a hero. And we as a community need to applaud that and see that person as a hero. You know, we need to be about getting justice for every child, for making sure that we speak up for every child and do that in courts as witnesses through cooperation. Thank you so much.
I'd like to introduce our second panelist, Reverend Peggy Miller.
Good morning. I want to thank the Black Women for Positive Change for this opportunity, and also especially thanks to Dr. Myers. She's a very, very hardworking woman. I'm sure Delegate Hester is equally as hardworking, but this is my first opportunity to meet her, so I want to thank her as well. I also want to thank Mr. Bobb for serving as our moderator, and to Chaplain Reynolds for that very powerful prayer unto the Lord, and also my co-panelist, Attorney Pohlhaus. I have had the opportunity of being blessed with two different professions. I am an attorney in private practice in Washington, D.C. and Maryland, but I also went into the ministry, and what I found in my practice was a discordance, a difficulty in the type of practice I was doing with families. And in talking to Dr. Myers one day, I talked to her about the violence that is in our families. Some of what I will say today may make some of you very unhappy and very uncomfortable, but it doesn't change the fact that for us to change the pathway and to look at the precursors of violence, we have to start in the home. We always get up and cut on the news or bring up the newspaper on our iPad or on our smartphone to see what violent activity has taken place outside of the home. But how many of us are honestly reflecting on the violence in the home? We start out with the definition of violence, and one of the definitions of violence is a clashing or jarring quality, a discordance, a disturbance, a lack of peace, a lack of rest. In addition to the violence of the physical violence from bullets and knives and other weapons, there's also violence in coercion, constraint, duress, and pressure. Violence is the opposite of a peace, calm, serenity type environment. And we say, well, what's that got to do with me and my family? What is she talking about? The Victim Prevention Alliance issued a world report on victim health. And there are three categories of violent interaction. The first is self-inflicted violence. That's where we are violent to ourselves, either through abuse or suicide. Lee Thompson Young, age 29, a very handsome, talented young actor, took his life. Jovan Belcher, an outstanding athlete, killed his girlfriend and then took his life. Chris Lighty, age 44, an American music industry executive, suicide. We just recently had Virginia State Senator Creed Deed's son, Gus, 24, stab his father violently before taking his life. The second interaction is the interpersonal violence. That's the one where we are in a relationship with people and it becomes violent. We have domestic violence, which we're very familiar with, violence against our children, violence against senior citizens, stranger violence where someone you don't know does something to you. That kind of violence is the one we rally around and we get angry about. We become mobilized as a community at the senseless murder of Trayvon Martin by a vigilante. We get caught up in the well of protest about the death of the innocent young Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri, murdered by a police officer. We become distressed and perplexed by the death of Renisha McBride, age 19, gunned down through a closed door. And that third form of interactive violence is the collective violence, where you look at looters and gang wars and terrorists. We have these elements of interaction in our violence, but oftentimes we don't want to talk about the culture of violence. Who hasn't laughed at Tyler Perry's Medea in her violence against family and property? We pay lots of monies to go see the Transformers, X-Men, Batman, and others who save us from intergalactic violence. We actually fight in movies and on television against pretend violence. Parents jokingly tell their children, "I brought you into this world, I'll take you out of it." It's a form of expressing our displeasure at our children, but you've just threatened death to someone you say you love. We don't mean it, but we're angry enough to speak violence. And as our other speakers have said, this country was created in violence with the Revolutionary War. The westward movement across the country was created by the violent displacement of the indigenous people. The agricultural growth of the nation was maintained by the violent enslavement of Africans. The current use of the Confederate flag is a symbol of the pride some still hold on the violent national struggle they call the Civil War. The precursors to violence begin at home. The greatest anger most of us usually have and feel is not against a stranger, but a family member. A major area of crisis that I saw in my practice was the interpersonal violence that comes from the lack of well-being of family in legal matters, in financial matters. Many families are having 3, 4, and 5 generations living at one time. Children are having children younger, and because of the opportunities that the medical sciences have provided, we're living longer. It's not uncommon to have a household in where there is an infant with a parent under 20. That parent under 20 has a parent 40, maybe under 40. That person has a parent in their 60s, and then that parent will have an elderly parent in their 80s and 90s. The problem with this dynamic is that the 3 and 4 and 5 generations don't have 3 and 4 sources of income. You have multiple generations with only a few sources of income. Oftentimes, the very elderly person is living on a fixed income at a time in their lives when their expenses are great. It costs a lot of money to age, as I'm finding out. It's not cheap to grow old. The infant, of course, for the most part, has little or no resources or income. Very seldom does the infant's young parents have much income as well. You end up with a family looking at only a couple of streams of income. But the infant has great needs. The elderly has great needs. And you have this discordance developing in the family. These streams of income become a crisis. Where to live and how to live becomes a crisis. Violence is birthed in families. Not because we don't want to love and be peaceful. There is a limit to what we have available. And so we strike out, and we cover it up, and we hide it, and we bury the violence that's coming out of our homes. The National Resource Center on Domestic Violence looked at employment issues, community and social support networks, physical and mental health problems to assess what impacts these have on family violence. What they learned is that wealth does not protect families from violence. While people with higher incomes may not have to turn to shelters and government agencies as often as lower income families, they still suffer the emotional, physical, and mental abuse. When we do not address our legal affairs and our finances, we seldom enjoy peace. I know that's hard for some people to hear, and it's hard for some people to take. But that's why my ministry developed, because I began to see the discordance. When your legal affairs and your financial affairs of your family are not in harmony and in sync with reality, you seldom enjoy peace. When families are truthful about their affairs, they can make calm, thoughtful decisions, and their relationships are not discordant. Are we actively acting violent? We fear we are not having enough. We don't have enough to go around. There isn't enough from paycheck to paycheck. It makes us angry and we feel somehow cheated. There's the brother or the sister, the mother, the father. There is somebody in the family who is getting more than their share or not doing their work. There is somebody caring for the aging parent while the other brother or sisters are out flitting around and not participating. And there is an anger that grows, and that anger leads to angry discordance in the family. When the family does not take the time to put its legal affairs and its financial affairs in order, it is setting itself up for tilting over when there is a crisis. Simple thing like names on a bank account. As Attorney Pohlhaus said, community, get to know your banker. Get to know the people who handle your money. Have a relationship with these people. It doesn't matter how much or how little you have in the bank, just have a relationship so that when someone comes in to disturb your financial peace, your banker will be aware. Names on birth certificates, it doesn't sound like much, but correct them so that a child is not traumatized when they have to take that birth certificate and oops, they find out that who they thought they were or who they thought their identity was does not match. I know it sounds silly to some of you, but it causes an anger and an intensity because children don't understand. But we as adults, as Attorney Pohlhaus said, are we trusted adults? Are we trusted family members? Correct employment records, not being ashamed of our employment, but being encouraged by the fact that we have a history. Have some record of your history so that when you get in crisis, your family members have the ability to aid and assist you in getting benefits that you're entitled to, finding out ways to protect you. Protect your health records. Pay attention when someone is not well, when they have to go to the doctor. Get the name and the address of the doctor. Have an opportunity to share your life experiences. If it's necessary, secure a child support order and not take shame that you have to ask for child support. So many women get caught up in not seeking child support because of the shame, the embarrassment. So many men are fearful of seeking custody or visitation rights with their children out of shame or embarrassment. In order to secure your life, you need to know who you are. Make sure you marry and divorce correctly. There's nothing worse in a family than finding out that the identity of the person is not their true identity. It causes anger and frustration. Set up responsible care plans for the elderly in the family. Have family meetings and conversations and try to figure out what you're going to do in times of need and times of stress. Make sure that there are legal agents in place for health care decisions. I tell everyone, if you're over the age of 18, you really desperately need a power of attorney and a medical health care directive. You don't need to find yourself in a situation that you cannot speak for 90 days. That's what I usually tell people. Most people tell me, oh no, you know, so-and-so will do this and so-and-so will do that. Well, no, your sister cannot come to attend to your legal affairs if you have not given her the authority to do so. Look at your life and ask yourself, who is going to attend to me in a crisis? And not be ashamed to work with your church or your community organizations, your advocacy groups, special programs set aside. Know what you own and how you own it. One of the most disappointing problems is when someone dies in the District of Columbia in Maryland, where I practice, and the family does not know how the property that they call the family home is owned, only to find out that it has been heavily mortgaged, only to find out that there's a reverse mortgage on it, only to find out that it never was your family property, only to find out that it should have been probated decades before when someone else passed but it wasn't attended to, and you end up with the family losing the property or the family having to sell the property at a very low rate because they did not know any better. This is a discordance that sets in, and it causes family violence. Identify your assets, whether you have 1 plate or 100 plates. Identify your assets so that you know, and take no shame in what you have. Oftentimes in the African American culture, there's a shame that you've lived this long and you don't have any more to show for it. Whatever you have, it's yours, and identify it. Understand your debts. It's very important in the spirit of discordance and family violence to understand your debts. Understand who you owe and what you owe. And make your family aware that there is a financial responsibility for peace and calm. There is a need to share with those that are closest to you that you're working with as family what's actually going on in the family, and not to cover it up and not to be embarrassed by it. The pathway to violence begins in the home. But as we were told earlier, that's also the pathway to peace. If we can get the home to appreciate the dynamics of the culture it's in, the changes in the culture that we're in, if the family will secure itself and protect itself, that is the beginning, that our children will walk out of the door desiring to live, so that when they see each other on the street, instead of striking each other, they will hug each other. If we can get the home to be secure and to be free of violence, we're sending out young people who have an appreciation for calm. I had the opportunity many years ago to go to Desmona in Israel, and among the black Jews there, we had an opportunity to see their wonderful community. And what one of the leaders said is, our children, and there were dozens and dozens of children there, have never witnessed violence. Our children have never seen anyone hit anyone in the community. They've never seen anyone kill anyone in the community. It's incumbent upon us to have homes where our children don't hear any violence perpetrated towards them. They don't see any acts of violence perpetrated towards them. So when our children step outside, they're expecting the world to be as wonderful as their home. Thank you.
Again, we're running just a little bit behind time, but we do have time for questions from our panel. There are a couple of very powerful messages from our panelists, and they were all powerful messages. But there are a couple that I wanted to get out to my Twitter family. One is that our children like a trusted leader in their home. And I think that's a very powerful message that we have to get out. We have to create opportunities for trust in our homes. And then the other message from our last panelist is that violence in the home, at least the way I'm interpreting it, has no relationship to income in the home. Sometimes there's this myth that if you come out of an impoverished situation in the home with very little income, that creates, although there's stress, that it will create a lot of violence. And it doesn't happen. But it also is the same thing can happen in homes where there is great wealth. We all remember the Melendez brothers and a few others. And then there's this other little piece that Wendy spoke about, but I'd just like to put a separate twist on it. There is this code of silence within our communities. And one of the things that I have found was that when the perpetrator, the individual who created the crime, is in court, and you have a witness who comes to court with the prosecutor, the individuals who created the crime have all kinds of support system. I don't know, I mean, if you've been in court, but I've been in court where someone who committed murder or violent crime, when you're in the courtroom, they have all kinds of support people sitting there. It's intimidating. So you have a witness over here, and it's only the witness with very little support and the prosecuting attorneys. That is a very intimidating situation. I've been there, I've seen it. And then the witness goes, well, how am I going to be protected? Look at all these people sitting there. They see me, they know where I live, they know my family members. That is an issue, and I just think we have to address that going forward. Questions from the audience?
We have microphone over here.
We have microphones over here, and then this one is available as well.
Can you come to the mic? Come over to the
Come
mic.
forward. Now, what we need is a very concise question, and then we need a very short answers, so we can keep the program moving forward. And as was stated earlier, we need those who are, on their tweet and Twitter and all of this, get the message out as quickly as you can. And I've been encouraging my few followers to come to the summit today. Yes, sir. Oh, ma'am, I'm sorry.
Good morning to everyone, and especially to the panel. Attorney Wendy, I am very gratified that you spoke about the snitching issue as well as Mr. Bobb. I would like to know, how do we in the community address the stigma that is attached to cooperating with the police in a real way?
Some of the things that we do in here in Washington, again, is the partnership between police and prosecutors and the community. And so, for instance, like we have faith-based town halls where we talk about this issue. And in Washington, we have what we call a victim witness protection assistance unit.
Mm-hmm.
And we explain to people the mechanisms that we really have to keep people safe and how we keep people safe. You give them hard facts. And you do that in partnership with the prosecutors and the police. And it's also a part of, because sometimes I think what's happening is that there's a lot of people they don't understand and they're not getting true facts about what happens to you when you're a witness. I mean, you're protected. There is a lot of, you're very protected. And I think that's a message that's not getting out to the community. And there are, you have what we call a witness advocate that works with you that will ensure that you get all the services that you need. And so there's a lot of protection. So the main way to do it is to just partner with police, partner with the prosecutors. We come out in communities and we talk about it. And we tell folks what happens, and we give them what we call the straight dope, and let people know you will be safe and what will happen. Explain to people about the criminal justice system. I spend a lot of time talking from A to B, what happens. So that way, when I tell you in times of calm, so if you ever find yourself in that situation, it's not such a scary situation. So a lot of it is education, explaining to people what the criminal justice system is about, what happens when you're a witness, how you're protected, the services that are offered to you, not just by our office, but also by DC government. The courts also has a whole office of victim protection, so does the police department. So you have many entities that are supporting victims of crime. So it's just a matter of discussion, if you live here in DC, call me up, invite me out. You know, I'll make sure I have the right partners out to come talk to your community about the whole issue of witness protection and how that happens in our community. Or in the criminal justice system, I come out and we talk about it.
Attorney Wendy, I'm going to take you up on that.
All right, take me up on it.
Mm-hmm. Please do. Take her up on it, because when someone commits a crime, violent crime, etc., it's really important that we have successful prosecution. Yes, sir.
Mine is more of a response, and I want to thank all of the panelists and the black women for creating this dialogue. I'd like to give you a round of applause, because everything that you have done is an uplifting for the spirit. Attorney Miller, that whole digression that you talked about is something that's really needed in our families, because a lot of people don't understand that we have to have peace. If we don't have peace within our cities, within our country, then this is all in vain. So I'd like for you to really talk about just how do we go about getting more people to be involved. I know it's small numbers here, but how do we get more people to be involved about the peace project?
Thank you. I think one of the things that we need to concentrate on is in helping families. The church, there are a number of churches represented here. Ministers need to talk about it from the pulpit. We have to start getting honest about who we really are. One of the things that has happened to us as a race of people in this country is that we are behind the major race, the white race, only because of history, not because of our intellect. And so some of us are first generation people with jobs that have sick leave, paid vacation. Some of us can't identify with who we really are because we keep chasing to be something we're not. So if we will just get honest about who we actually are and start preaching it from the pulpit, if our doctors, our lawyers in the community start talking to us, it's okay to be who you are. You're perfectly fine just like you are. Let's get honest about who we are. Women have to get honest about the situation that they find themselves in financially. Men have to get honest about the situation they find themselves in. If we will just break down the pretense, we can get to the solution.
Thank you.
Thank you, and yes.
As I listened to what Attorney Pohlhaus was talking about, I'd like to ask about the media because, I'm in the media and I'm just now hearing this other side of the snitching issue, because I just heard the power of the one story. If I tell, I'm going to get hurt. So, do you think that there's a way to bring this? Because if we tell the story, we can begin momentum. And also, I think of all these churches in the city. If churches would show up in the court, and I don't see why we can't. And so, is there anything that can be done to, go to the ministers' conferences and all these? Have you done that, or is this something that you think can work to get the church involved?
Well, what we have at our office, we have something called the faith-based ambassadors. And what we're doing is that we went out and recruited from all different faith-based communities, and this is kind of an invitation I'm making now to any faith-based communities here in Washington, D.C. And what we do is we have a curriculum, and we have a curriculum where we teach ministers about the criminal justice system. So that way, and the difficulties that we have in the criminal justice system. So that way, instead of me going out and saying, we need more cooperation, ministers themselves are educated on the criminal justice system, what is needed, victim support, so they can in turn go to their congregants and have those kind of conversations. So part of it is just reaching out to our faith-based partners, and we do a lot of that. There's many ways in which you can work with your faith-based communities to get them to start talking about that, but that's how we decided to do it in Washington.
Thank you for that, and that's all great information, and hopefully we can put all this information and continue to spread it out. But I want to thank our panelists. I want to thank the conference, and in particular the summit, and the Black Women for Positive Change. This is their second annual event, and let's hope that this event will continue to grow. And as I stated earlier, don't worry about having few people in the audience. Everyone in the audience goes out, must have the responsibility to go out and create an army. Think of it like Amway, right? We sell one here, we sell two there, and we go out and we create the multitude. And this is a very important message that we have spoken to today on this panel and the panels to follow. So thank you all very much.
Thank you, Mr. Robert Bobb and Attorney Wendy. I like that name, Wendy. Our Attorney Wendy and Reverend Peggy. We're just honored to have such really high quality expertise with us today.